we might have to wait a little while longer for our burst of warmer spring weather.
Some cool nights ahead, and as you suggested earlier, take a jacket with you if you're heading out over the coming days. That's the program this hour. Stay with us for 9 News at 6.
Tonight, Bali bombing's ground zero, survivors gather in Kuta, 2 decades since the night that scarred our nation forever. Kings Park silent at sunrise, loved ones remember the 16 West Australians who never made it home. Emotions run high in Parliament as Canberra pauses in a national service. Plus fears tonight hospital beds could close after the biggest mass walkout by fed-up nurses. The star of stage, screen and TV mysteries, Angela Lansbury, dies aged 96. And the daring duck rescue that sparked freeway mayhem.
This is 9 News Perth with Tracy Vo.
Good evening. October 12, 2002 is a date which will stay with the nation forever. 202 innocent lives were lost, including 88 Australians, after terrorists detonated 2 bombs in Bali. 20 years on, survivors and loved ones have come together to remember the faces and names of the devastating attack. Damien Ryan begins our coverage.
Dawn on the 12th of October in paradise. 20 years ago, no one would have dreamt this would be the start of one of our darkest days. A few hours later, a few kilometres away, the milestone is marked with tears. The Australian consulate transformed into a place of mourning. 300 people impacted in some way by that day, whether they were families of the victims or survivors like Andy Sabi from the Gold Coast, who emerged from the rubble barely alive.
So I was granted a second chance at life, and I make every minute count. Yes, I am lucky. I made it home, and I will honour that privilege.
And then there were the first responders, the police who identified victims and the bombers.
I could have never imagined how responding to the events here in Bali would have shaped my policing career and, more broadly, my life.
The speech is over, a moment of reflection. And for every person, their own memories. But one message to Angela Galotta could have been to all. I miss you every day, my dear granddaughter. You were 1 in a million. Love, Granny.
It's tough. It's not easy. There's no finish line for this anniversary.
75-year-old Denny Hanley came all the way from Queensland to honour his 2 daughters.
I hope they're looking down on me and proud of their dad, yeah, so that's really something nice to think about.
They say time heals all wounds, but that may not be the case for many here, not just October 12, but every day they miss those who were living life and had that snatched away. Many of the Australians moved straight on to the Bali Memorial site, just metres from where South Australian Bob Marshall lost his life.
This was the last place he breathed, and so he was only here for 20 hours.
I know it's the 20th anniversary, but we miss him every single day.
They're not alone, as 2 nations mourn those lost in paradise.
Damien Ryan is in Kuta tonight. Damien, a special service is being held there this evening.
Yes, certainly, Tracy. It was Indonesia's turn to mark this anniversary, and as expected, a heavy security presence as a huge crowd gathered here, what was, of course, ground zero 20 years ago. It certainly was very rich in Indonesian tradition, a dance for peace by performers in ceremonial dress. Now, victims, of course, 202 victims. They came from 22 countries, so there were a lot of people from all over the world here, including, of course, Indonesia. The audience heard Chumini's story, a survival, told by our own Assistant Foreign Affairs Minister, Tim Watts. Now, she was a bartender in Paddy's Bar and was one of the lucky ones. An amazing story. Now, later this evening at 11:05 local time, there will be a minute silence. It's the moment the bombs went off 2 decades ago. Tracy?
An emotional day. Damien Ryan in Kuta, thank you. 16 of the 88 Australians were from WA. Today, Perth paused to remember one of our darkest days in history. The grief still raw 2 decades on.
They came together at dawn, survivors standing side by side with family and friends of those who never made it home. 20 years has done little to dull the pain.
There's no such thing as closure. It's booked. In our case anyway, because of how it happened.
Kevin Poltridge lost his son Corey. He was at the Sari Club when the second bomb went off. One of 7 Kingsley footballers killed on an end-of-season trip.
Just fun-loving, 20-year-old who was going to have the time of his life with his footy mates and lost his life.
Been to Bali many times, been to the Sari Club actually, before the events in question, and you just sort of think, like everyone else, that could have been me or a family member of mine.
World-leading burn specialist Dr. Fiona Wood reflected on her time working around the clock to save those evacuated to Perth for emergency surgery. Her spray on skin helping to protect and heal those who suffered horrific burns.
As people arrived in Perth, I think the thing I always remember is the look of relief on the faces as the patients were wheeled in through to Royal Perth into the emergency department. They were home.
In Coota, the memories are flooding back for Perth survivor Lee Harrison.
I don't know, I might have been unconscious for a little while because I landed and then all of a sudden I woke up and I was on top of people.
He made it out of the Sari Club, but his sister, 29-year-old Nicole Harrison, was killed.
I always miss you, Nikki. I love you forever.
He's held on to the shirt he wore that night.
I still haven't washed it. I'll never wash it or throw it out.
There's growing anger amongst Perth survivors about the impending release of Umar Patek, the man who made these devastating bombs. But today wasn't a time for anger. Instead, a moment to pause and reflect.
But it's obviously amazing that every year people show up and they show up to obviously to honour and also to support us.
It is very emotional. It's one of those days that it's still raw 20 years on.
And hopefully this is not let them win because they are not win. That's why we're standing here.
Michael Genovese, 9 News.
And you can see more of that interview with WA survivor Lee Harrison and his emotional journey back to Bali tonight in A Current Affair. A national service was held today at Parliament House in Canberra, but the most personal tributes took place outside as those impacted by the horror gathered to support each other.
Reaching out for a lost loved one. Survivors and family members gather in a memorial garden in Canberra, each seeking comfort in their own way. A tender embrace between generations. Words penned for a little brother.
We're sort of missing him. Hope he's enjoying heaven. People down here would have liked to have met you.
Inside Parliament House, emotions running high. From the Prime Minister who saw the aftermath firsthand.
What had happened was brutal, villainous murder.
And Detective Inspector Mark Lang, who was sent to Coota to speak with survivors.
Quite frankly, it was overwhelming. And I simply didn't know how we were going to manage what we were confronted with.
That's how he met Simon Quayle, the coach of the Kingsley Cats Football Club.
20 years on today, we stand here as very, very close friends.
Lindsay Ross's son David was among the 7 players who died.
If we don't talk about these things and we don't commemorate these things, it just gets forgotten.
Phil Britton survived despite suffering burns to 60% of his body.
I can only describe it as this almighty powerful wave of heat and explosive power that just blew me across the dance floor.
In the hours after the ceremony in Canberra, people have continued to quietly trickle in to the Bali Memorial Gardens here at Parliament House to pause and remember their loved ones. Among them, John Howard, taking a moment to himself to reflect. Fiona Willan, 9 News.
A warning tonight, hospital beds could close across WA after nurses voted to ramp up their industrial action. More than 2,000 staged a mass walkout demanding more money and better conditions.
They're exhausted, angry and hard to ignore.
The Labor government have found $6 billion in the budget. Why don't they spend it on the backbone of WA?
2,500 nurses and midwives from hospitals as far as Bunbury walking off the job.
What do you want? Fair and right!
piling onto buses before swarming the convention centre. They're calling for a 5% pay rise plus an inflation top-up and nurse-to-patient ratios. Armed with whistles, cowbells and horns, they made sure Parliament House would hear them.
The workload is just massive. So we're going to lose people out of the profession.
I'm only a new qualified nurse and I'm already burnt out.
Once they'd packed the Riverside Theatre, the noise levels rose by more than a few decibels.
No more will we take on more and more patients. No more will we pick up extra duties. No more will we work double shifts.
The union says this is the biggest rally they've ever held. The nurses here today voting a resounding yes to further industrial action over the next 7 days.
That could initially include bans on double shifts. In the weeks following that, overtime could be banned, day-long work stoppages are possible, along with the closing of 1 in 5 hospital beds. Worst case scenario,
indefinite strike action.
Members also suggesting an even bigger pay rise.
We want 10% per year.
The union will now take that to the Health Minister.
There isn't any need to go and take industrial action at this point in time. There's just no need for it.
We want the government to listen. Yeah. That's all.
Natalia Cooper, 9 News.
A Mandurah grandfather has joined the chorus of criticism over the state of our health system after a hospital ramping nightmare. Paul Eyre was prepped for urgent surgery, only to wait in the back of an ambulance for 6 excruciating hours.
Paul Eyre felt he had to speak up.
I mean, what could have happened? You know, that's my concern.
Adding his hospital horror story to an ever-growing list.
To me, it was chaotic. Mismanagement and management by crisis is probably the best way to describe it.
The 64-year-old presented to Peel Health Campus last month in excruciating pain, told he needed bowel surgery that'd have to be done at Fiona Stanley Hospital. 24 hours later, word came through he had a bed.
An ambulance gets called, all good, and I'm thinking, OK, finally something's going to get done. I'll have the op, things will get better. But no, that's when this absurd ramping situation cropped up.
For 6 agonising hours, the retiree says he sat in that ambulance outside emergency.
I was a patient transfer. It was quite obvious. I've got a gown on. I've got all the stuff hanging out. I'm not going to a fancy dress party. You know, I'm here for an operation.
Then another 3 hours inside. Paul Eyre says his situation became so desperate he asked his wife to see if a private hospital could take him. It was only then, he says, things started happening here.
The people in charge of the system and running the system need a serious wake-up call.
The hospital says it's sorry to hear his experience and concerns, and this is being investigated as a formal complaint.
Again, we are seeing more reports about a health system which is lurching from crisis to crisis.
The father at the centre of one of those crises today launching a petition for a royal commission, hoping to prevent another tragedy like Little Ashwaria's.
Somebody is paying the price.
Louise Rennie, 9 News.
Homicide squad detectives have charged a 38-year-old man with manslaughter over a blast that killed soon-to-be father Jack Caneen. The 23-year-old was four-wheel driving with friends in Pinjar in Perth's north last month when he came across the blaze. He suffered critical injuries and died at the scene. The 38-year-old is tonight behind bars, accused of deliberately lighting the fire in a way to cause an explosion. Police say the men weren't known to each other. Brittany Higgins will resume giving evidence on Friday after being unavailable to take to the stand this week. The trial of former political staffer Bruce Lerman is likely to conclude weeks earlier than expected, with the prosecutor saying he'll close his case at the beginning of next week. Bruce Lerman has pleaded not guilty to the single charge of sexual intercourse without consent at Parliament House in 2019. Fears of a global recession are escalating tonight after a fresh warning from the International Monetary Fund. While Australia won't be completely spared, our nation is expected to avoid the worst of the downturn.
A dire warning for the world economy.
In short, the worst is yet to come.
With Russia's invasion of Ukraine and a cost of living crisis wreaking financial havoc, a top economic agency says a third of countries face a possible recession next year.
The three largest economies, the United States, China, and the euro area, will continue to stall.
Australia, one of the lucky ones, expected to sidestep the worst of a global downturn. But the International Monetary Fund forecasts economic growth here will still be cut in half from 3.8% this year to 1.9% in 2023.
We're not immune to what's going on around the world.
In the shadow of global economic woes, the Treasurer will tonight touch down in Washington to hear firsthand from the IMF about the challenges ahead. When Jim Chalmers returns, he'll be putting the finishing touches on his first budget. The opposition says it's found a $500 million black hole in Labor's costings.
It's so far wrong, it's almost laughable.
The government admits $63 million in revenue will be raised by ramping up fines for businesses engaged in anti-competitive conduct, not the $557 million it was initially expecting.
I reject the Shadow Treasurer trying to have a crack. I don't remember hearing him carry on when they got their JobKeeper costings wrong by $60 billion.
Eliza Edwards, 9 News.
A car has erupted in flames at a petrol station in Osborne Park. Emergency crews suspect the fireball was sparked by an electrical fault just after 1 o'clock this afternoon on Royal Street. The driver wasn't injured and crews were able to douse the flames before it spread to the nearest Bowser just 3 metres away. For 7 decades, Angela Lansbury captivated audiences and collected accolades. The 96-year-old actress, whose glittering career began during the golden age of Hollywood, died today at her home in Los Angeles.
She was a legend of the small screen and the silver screen.
You're not suggesting that I should take these children into my house? Exactly.
Sometimes unrecognisable.
The problem with you is that you have too many children.
She oozed charm even when we couldn't see her.
Cheer up, child. It'll turn out all right in the end. You'll see.
Dame Angela Lansbury was born in London in 1925. She fled during the Blitz for the bright lights of Hollywood. Her breakthrough role, a psychotic mother in The Manchurian Candidate.
You are to shoot the presidential nominee through the head.
But it was as witch Eglantine Price in Bedknobs and Broomsticks.
That's my nightgown.
Is it really, my dear?
Yes, and I'm not responsible for its behaviour.
That put Hollywood under her spell. It was Murder, She Wrote that made her a household name. There was no mystery too big or small for Jessica Fletcher.
I think I know who killed Ben Kamaka.
The show was a hit, winning Lansbury 4 Golden Globes and 10 Emmy nominations. But with great highs came terrible lows. In 2003, Lansbury's husband of 54 years died. She withdrew from acting completely.
I didn't make any moves myself. And
but nothing could hold her back. The stage, the screen, they were her home. There's no question Dame Angela Lansbury was Hollywood royalty. Full of class and grace, a treasure until the very end.
Tale as old as time, song as old as rhyme, beauty and the beast.
Amelia Adams, 9 News.
Shirley Biggs is here with your weather details now. Sherry, a mix of sun and clouds across the suburbs.
Well, even when we were getting that sunshine, Trace, it didn't feel very warm at all with a chilly southerly breeze. We started the day with another cold morning. Temperatures plummeted sub-zero inland, sending a widespread frost to our agricultural regions again, with farmers currently in harvesting season. Now, in the metro, it was the Swan Valley with the coldest start to the day, dipping below 3 degrees this morning. And even though we reached a top of 19.4 degrees in the city at around lunchtime, wind chill meant it never felt warmer than around 12 or 13 degrees. So, Trace, there is more sunny days leading into the weekend, but it doesn't look like we'll be shaking this chilly breeze anytime soon, so I'll have some weather details coming up
We'll
soon.
soak up that sunshine, though. All right, Sherry, thank you. See you soon. Next, danger to Perth drivers as a flock of ducks go free range. The daring rescue that sparked rush hour chaos on Kwinana Freeway. Plus, a wild mid-air brawl forces a Jetstar pilot into an emergency landing. The fight to save a WA abuse survivor facility. And Buckingham Palace reveals the date for the King's coronation with a modern twist.